you noticed that you don't visit people as often as you used to? It wasn't a sudden decision, not something you planned. But somewhere along the way, the invitations came, and instead of answering with an eager yes, you hesitated. Not because you don't care, but because something inside you changed. There was a time when visiting felt effortless. You'd step out the door without a second thought, knock on a neighbor's door, drop by a friend's house for coffee, or gather around a crowded dinner table. Voices overlapping, laughter spilling into the late hours. Those moments were woven into the fabric of life, a rhythm so natural you never imagined it would slow down. But now something feels different. The thought of making the trip, sitting through conversations that don't always feel the same, it takes more out of you than it used to. And then the questions come. Am I withdrawing? Am I losing touch? Should I be making more of an effort? Maybe you've felt a quiet pang of guilt, wondering if something is wrong. But what if this change isn't something to fight? What if it's something to embrace? Because this isn't isolation, it's wisdom. It's the quiet realization that time and energy are no longer infinite, that presence should never be an obligation, and that connection isn't measured by how often you show up, but by the meaning behind the moments you choose. So if you've felt this shift, let go of the guilt. This isn't the end of connection. It's the beginning of something more intentional, a quieter, deeper way of staying close to the people who truly matter. And today we'll explore 5 powerful reasons why this change isn't something to fear, it's something to welcome. Here at Elderly Wisdom Story, we share reflections that bring clarity, comfort, and a sense of belonging. If this resonates with you, you're not alone. Subscribe and stay with us, because what we're about to uncover may change the way you see not only your relationships but the way you move through this chapter of life. Let's begin. Life shifts, and so do we. The way we spend our time, the people we choose to be around, the conversations we engage in, all of it changes, not because we've lost interest, but because we've gained clarity. There was a time when visiting others was second nature, when saying yes to every invitation felt effortless, when being present in as many moments as possible seemed like the way to live fully. But as the years pass, we begin to see time differently, not as something to be filled, but as something to be cherished. Time, after all, is like fine gold. When we're young, we spend it freely, thinking there will always be more. We rush from one event to another, keeping up appearances, tending to friendships, filling our days with obligations that once felt necessary. But then life reminds us that time is not infinite, and suddenly we're more aware of where we place it, who we give it to, and whether those moments truly bring us joy. It's not about pulling away from the world, it's about choosing where your energy is best spent. Frank, a retired school principal, spent most of his life showing up for others. He never missed a family gathering, always made the effort to visit friends, and believed that presence equaled love. But as the years passed, he started noticing something. The people who truly valued him didn't need frequent visits to feel close. The depth of their connection wasn't measured by how often he showed up, but by the sincerity of the moments they shared. Slowly, he began prioritizing differently. Not out of neglect, but out of wisdom. He chose conversations that felt fulfilling, relationships that uplifted him, and moments that left him feeling whole rather than depleted. And isn't that what matters most? If you only had 1 hour of energy today, who would you choose to spend it with? It's a question that lingers, one that becomes more relevant with each passing year, because time, much like wealth, should be spent wisely. And those who truly love you don't need constant presence to feel your heart. They simply need to know that when you are there completely. With time, we begin to see life differently. We no longer rush to fill our calendars or prove our presence. We understand that time, like a precious currency, is meant to be spent wisely. And with that realization comes another truth. Not every relationship is worth the energy it once required. There was a time when being surrounded by people felt important, when every acquaintance held a place in our lives simply because they had always been there. We kept up with conversations, listened to stories we had heard before, nodded through complaints that never changed. We tolerated gossip, small talk, and surface-level connections because that's what we had always done. But just as time teaches us to be careful with how we spend our days, it also teaches us to be careful with whom we spend them. A sculptor does not create by adding, but by taking away. With each movement, they remove what no longer belongs, revealing the beauty hidden beneath. And in many ways, aging allows us to do the same. We begin to chisel away the relationships that drain us, that bring more obligation than joy, that leave us feeling empty rather than full. And as we do, we uncover something far more valuable, the relationships that truly nourish us. Helen, a 76-year-old widow, spent years maintaining a group of friendships simply because they had always been part of her life. But each visit left her feeling exhausted, burdened by conversations that revolved around complaints and gossip rather than meaningful connection. Slowly, she began to step back, not out of resentment, but out of self-respect. And in doing so, she discovered something better. She deepened the relationships that brought her peace, one-on-one conversations where words carried weight, where silence was comfortable, where she felt understood rather than drained. Perhaps you, too, have left a visit feeling more tired than when you arrived. If so, it's not a sign that you've grown distant. It's a sign that you've grown. There is no guilt in choosing depth over surface, in valuing the company of a few who uplift you over many who deplete you. So take a moment to reflect. If you were to create a joy list today, who would be on it? Who are the people that leave you feeling lighter, more alive? These are the relationships worth keeping. And as for the rest, you're not being unkind by letting them go. You're simply choosing peace. As we grow older, we begin to let go. We step away from relationships that drain us, from conversations that feel forced, from the need to be everywhere at once. And in that quiet shift, something remarkable happens. We start to return home. Not just physically, but emotionally. Home is no longer just where we sleep. It becomes the place where we feel most ourselves. In our younger years, home was a stopping point, a place we left each morning, only to return to at night, weary from the world. But as time passes, home transforms. It becomes less of a destination and more of a sanctuary. A space that doesn't demand, doesn't exhaust, doesn't require us to be anything other than who we are. Bill, a retired firefighter, spent most of his life in motion, always somewhere, always with someone, always showing up. For years, he believed that staying socially active meant saying yes to every invitation, keeping up with old routines, making sure he was present. But over time, he noticed something. Each time he left his home, there was a part of him that longed to return. He felt it in the weight of his shoulders, in the way his mind wandered back to the familiar, the chair that molded to his body just right, the quiet hum of his own space, the peace of simply being. At first, he worried. Was he pulling away? Was he becoming isolated? But then he understood. He wasn't distancing himself from life, he was settling into it. There is a profound freedom in recognizing that home is not a retreat from the world, but a return to yourself. It is the one place where the expectations fade, where the outside noise quiets, where you don't have to fit into anyone else's schedule, mood, or conversation. Here, your rhythm is your own. There is no need to entertain, no pressure to be on. You wake up to the stillness of morning, sip coffee from your favorite mug, move through your day without rush or obligation. And in that stillness, there is something rare, a sense of belonging that no other place can offer. So instead of feeling obligated to step into spaces that no longer bring you joy, invite people into yours. Let your home be a place of warmth, of connection, of laughter that doesn't require effort, only presence. Because home isn't just where you are, it's where you belong. And choosing it isn't isolation. It's peace. As we grow older, we begin to understand something we may have overlooked in our younger years. Peace is not something we seek outside of ourselves. It is something we return to, something we create. We start by choosing home over the demands of the outside world, allowing it to become more than a place of rest, but a sanctuary where we feel most at ease. And then something shifts again. The silence that once felt unfamiliar begins to feel like a companion. The space we once filled with obligations, social visits, and endless activity no longer needs to be filled at all. There comes a moment when life stops being about proving yourself to others and starts being about truly knowing yourself. We once believed that staying busy meant staying engaged, that a full calendar was a sign of a meaningful life. But now the urgency fades. The need to be everywhere, to say yes to every invitation, gives way to something else. A deeper longing, not for more people, but for more meaning. Robert, a retired businessman, spent decades shaking hands, attending events, making sure he was always seen. He built relationships, maintained connections, stayed in motion because that's what success looked like. But as the years passed, he noticed something. The moments that felt the most fulfilling were not the ones spent in crowded rooms, but the ones spent in solitude. A quiet walk where he could hear the wind move through the trees. The simple joy of reading a book he had never quite made time for. The feeling of the sun on his face as he sat in the garden, allowing himself to be still. At first, he questioned it. Was he pulling away? Losing touch? But then, he realized. He wasn't stepping back from life. He was stepping deeper into it. There is a profound peace in realizing that life no longer needs to be lived in a rush. The world has conditioned us to believe that doing more means living more. But the truth is, some of the richest moments happen in the stillness. The morning sunlight spilling into the room as you sip coffee in silence. The feeling of your hands deep in the soil as you tend to a garden that asks nothing of you except your presence. The quiet satisfaction of creating, painting, writing, learning, not for anyone else, but for yourself. So if you felt this shift, if the pull towards solitude has become stronger than the pull toward endless activity, know that this is not a loss. It's an awakening, a chance to embrace a life that is not measured by how many people you see, but by how deeply you engage with what truly brings you joy. You are not stepping away, you are stepping into something far greater. Yourself. As we grow into this new chapter of life, we begin to understand that solitude is not loneliness. It is fulfillment. We no longer chase busy schedules, constant engagements, or the need to be everywhere at once. Instead, we embrace something softer, something quieter. And in this stillness, we realize something else. The friendships that truly matter were never about proximity, but about depth. There was a time when friendships were woven into the fabric of everyday life, phone calls, shared meals, familiar voices filling the spaces around us. But just as the seasons change, so do the ways we stay connected. We begin to see that real friendship isn't measured by how often we meet, but by something far deeper, the quiet knowing that no matter how much time passes, some bonds remain unshaken. Friendships, much like candlelight, don't need to burn all day to shine bright. The relationships that bring the most warmth are not the ones that demand constant tending, but the ones that glow steadily, unwavering, even from a distance. You may not see each other as often, but when you do, the conversation flows as if no time has passed at all. There is no guilt, no need for explanation, just the quiet reassurance that you are thought of, that you are valued, that your presence in someone's life does not need to be proven, only felt. Nancy, a retired nurse, once feared that by skipping visits, she would lose her closest friendships. She had spent years believing that relationships required constant effort, that the absence of frequent contact meant a bond was fading. But as time passed, she noticed something. The people who truly mattered never made her feel guilty for the space in between. They didn't need check-ins to know she cared. Their connection had been built on something stronger than presence alone, trust, understanding, and an unspoken promise that distance would never erase. And that is the beauty of true friendship. The people who love you do not count the weeks or months between visits. They do not expect you to be everywhere at once. Instead, they exist in the quiet spaces too, in the laughter that lingers long after a conversation ends, in the comfort of a memory shared, in the knowledge that whenever you do reach out, it will feel just the same. So if you have ever felt the weight of guilt for not visiting as often as you once did, let it go. Friendships were never meant to be a test of attendance. The relationships that are real will remain, no matter how much time passes. And the ones that fade, perhaps they were never as strong as you once believed. Because true connection does not demand constant presence, it only asks for sincerity when you are there. Life is a series of shifting seasons, and with each transition comes a deeper understanding of what truly matters. There was a time when socializing meant saying yes to every invitation, showing up out of obligation, and filling the spaces in between with conversation, whether meaningful or not. But as the years pass, we begin to realize that our presence is no longer something to be given freely, it is something to be offered where it matters most. Visiting people less isn't about pulling away. It isn't about isolation or growing distant. It's about honoring your time, your energy, and the relationships that bring you true fulfillment. You have spent a lifetime showing up for others, caring, giving, and making sure no one felt alone. But now this season belongs to you. This is your time to choose, your time to seek joy in the spaces that feel right, to embrace the comfort of solitude without guilt, and to surround yourself with people who uplift your spirit rather than drain it. You do not owe the world constant presence. What you owe yourself is peace, purpose, fulfillment, and the freedom to spend your days in a way that feels meaningful to you. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's that life is not measured by how often you show up, but by the sincerity of the moments you choose. The friendships that last are not the ones built on obligation, but on trust, understanding, and quiet knowing. The greatest gift you can give, to yourself and to others, is not your constant presence, but your authentic presence. So if you've felt this shift in your own life, if you've noticed yourself visiting less, choosing differently, prioritizing more intentionally, embrace it. It means you're growing. It means you're listening to what your heart needs. And that is something to celebrate. If this resonates with you, take a moment to reflect. What changes have you noticed in your social life? How have your priorities shifted? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your wisdom. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Elderly Wisdom Story and join a community that values insight, reflection, and the beauty of life's later years. Because wisdom, much like true connection, is something that only grows richer with time.